everybody, Joe here for Monday Morning Coffee. Thanks for joining me. I'm coming to you this morning from Dublin, Ireland. This is the River Liffey. Over here is the Halfpenny Bridge, and we've got, of course, some great coffee from one of the vendors here. So let's get started and talk about today's subject. Hey everyone, the short subject today is about using high ISOs on smaller sensor cameras. In particular, this is shot with a Fuji X-S10, which is an APS-C sensor. And people have a tendency to poo-poo the APS-Cs and the Micro Four Thirds sensors, saying, oh, they're noisy, they don't do well in low light. And I say, poppycock, pardon my language. Just an example, I tested this in theory when I was in Ireland. This is in Trinity College in Dublin, called the Long Room, and this is just the raw file with nothing done to it. I was very careful to protect the highlights in this, even though it was a very dark room. And you can see up here in the histogram that really the graph goes from all the way left to all the way right. And there's maybe a little bit of pure black. In fact, if we hover over there, you can see up in here, that's some pure black, but it really is nothing that matters. It's okay that it's pure black. Let's just do a quick, we'll open up the shadows a bit. And one thing I have noticed when you're shooting very high ISO is that you have a tendency to lose some saturation. So I'm going to bring up the exposure a little bit because I brought the highlights down. And I'm going to bring up the saturation up a lot because this is how I remember the room having kind of a golden hue to it. So I think more something like that. Vibrance is just the cooler colors. I don't want to make the blue jeans any more popping in the image. And I just took this shot just to show you this is what the entire room looks like. But let's go in closer. And I just thought this was just such a beautiful image. And I'm going to get rid of the left and right panels just so we can kind of, in fact, let's go full screen. Let's just get rid of everything else just so you can see what's going on here. That looks pretty darn clean, doesn't it? Well, what was this shot at? Let's hit I to see, and let's hit I again. And we could see that this was shot at basically 50 millimeters. But APS-C, so this is 75 millimeters, at 1/25th of a second, f4 at 3200 ISO. Now I'm going to bring the left tab up again because I want to look at it at 100%, and I want to show you how clean this is. Take a look at this. I mean, these are some seriously old books. This is 16th, 15th century books here. Really fascinating to take a look at. There are a couple that are out on display. But notice how clean this is. And all it really needed was a little saturation brought back and maybe a little flattening of the contrast. Maybe open up the shadows, bring the highlights down, and that allowed to open up the overall exposure. But it really turned out to be quite beautiful. Now let's take a look, a picture of the vaulted ceiling here. And again, this is 56.5 millimeters, again, 1/25th of a second, 3200 ISO at f4. And you think f4, oh, it's not going to be sharp. Yes, it is, because none of this stuff is close to where I'm standing. So if we zoom in, you can see everything looks pretty sharp. Let's take a look at another one, looking down an entire row. Let's back off on the zoom here. So here, let's get rid of, again, this is 24.7 millimeters, again, 1/25th of a second, 3200 ISO. Oh, and by the way, this place does not allow tripods. You can't bring your tripod in here. So this is all handheld stuff. And guess what? It gets better. Hold on a second. And again, but look at the clarity. Let's zoom in and you can see, is there some grain in there? Sure there is. There's a little bit, but actually in these old books, it actually looks like it should be slightly grainy. So let me show you one of my favorite shots, and that's this one here. Let's back off on the zoom. And I wanted to show you again, 125th of a second, f4, 3200 ISO. I love this image. I love the composition of it. Let's go full screen. And there's just something so calm about it. And again, these are 15th, 16th century books. And let's look at 100%. And as it draws in, you can see, look at how clean that is. That is, for me, that is absolutely beautiful. Again, a little bit of grain. The grain is so fine to the point that if you were to make a print of this, it wouldn't even be visible. In fact, if you want to judge how a print is going to look as far as clarity goes, my recommendation is, if you're in Lightroom, go to 50% and then go full screen. That's what your print's going to look like as far as sharpness goes. And that looks plenty sharp to me. And at this magnification, 50%, I can't even see any grain. So there you go. Handheld, f4, 3200 ISO, anywhere from a 15th to a 25th of a second exposure, and all of these worked. APS-C cameras can do this just fine. Oh, and I forgot one really important point. How do you make this happen? Don't underexpose. Make sure your exposure is good. If you underexpose, then it gets noisy because the camera's struggling to pull out the details and the shadows. If anything, overexpose a real little bit without clipping your highlights, and that's going to make for a less noisy file because on the right side of the histogram, the brighter spots, there's more data there. So the key to shooting high ISO photography indoors in a place like this with an APS-C or Micro Four Thirds camera is be careful of your exposure. Do not underexpose. 3200 ISO, even 6400. Is there going to be a little grain in there? Sure there is. Is it noticeable? Is it something that's going to take away from the image? I present this to you right here, what you see on the screen. That's what you can get. So there you go. You can shoot high ISO with your cameras, any of them. Just make sure your exposure is good, and that will make your adjustments easy. So thanks for watching. Greetings again from Dublin, Ireland, and I wish you a great week ahead. See you soon.